Welcome to the Morning Glory Project, Stories of Determination. I'm your host, Betsy Graziani Fossbender. Like in nature, we see determined flowers and vines clinging to life and seeking light. So are Morning Glory people. And in this podcast, I'll interview writers, activists, artists, entrepreneurs, survivors and thrivers, and trailblazers of all kinds. These are folks that have been determined to get over, under, around, and through the obstacles that face them, or to seize the opportunities that come before them. I find these people inspiring and amazing. I know you will too. Today, it is my honor to welcome to the Morning Glory Project, Karen Haycox. As CEO of Habitat for Humanity, New York City, Karen Haycox has pulled from every aspect of herself, her history, her losses, and her talents to help her teams provide housing to those who might otherwise never have homes that they need. The lessons she's learned from losing one she loved, to embracing sobriety, and even her background in filmmaking all serve her now in the highly demanding role of wrangling all of the entities and overcoming all of the obstacles required to create homes for others. Karen's deeply involved in New York's LGBTQ community and housing communities. She's dedicated to providing New York's LGBTQ seniors with supportive, affordable housing and safe housing options. Determination, talents, and wisdom gathered along the way turn out to be the perfect constellation of skills for doing exactly the work she never aimed for, but which she now knows she was meant to do. And look, yes, just as we begin, we get a siren in the background. Isn't that perfect? Welcome, Karen, to the Morning Glory Project. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm honored to be here. And for anybody who's acquainted with the New York City market, you know that sirens in the background are a daily occurrence. So we'll say a prayer for the well-being of whoever needs the siren and continue boldly onward.
Right. Well, Karen, I was thinking about this conversation with you and what I've learned in reading about you and in listening to podcasts where you that you've done in the past. And boy, you got to this CEO-ship, if that's not even a word, you got to this position of CEO with a long and winding road. And what I really found interesting is it's not the destination you originally aimed for, this Habitat for Humanity. It's where you're clearly, like you said, it's what you never aimed for, but what you know you were meant to do. Can you tell me about that, what you never aimed for and how you know you're meant to do it?
Sure. And thank you for asking. I mean, I'm so honored to, sometimes I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for the opportunities that I have been afforded in my life. And this is one of those times when you put it to me in just that way. But certainly, it was not the road that I intended. The road that I intended had much more to do with being a famous film and television producer. And while I did spend some time as a producer, it has really been the most fulfilling journey of my life to be part of Habitat for Humanity and all that we do as a mission. And it was a bit of a circuitous route to get here. It had to do with a career, midlife and career crisis that happens to many of us. I was downsized in quite an unseemly way and really disconnected from what I thought, I so closely identified myself and my sense of self with being a producer that when I was downsized, I felt unanchored and kind of adrift, and really thought my life was over in a very dramatic way. I thought, everything I thought that I was associated with my role as a producer. And part of my story is that I'm also grateful to be a recovering alcoholic and addict. And during that time period, let's just say I wasn't in recovery. So I was I was not only disconnected from the only way that I had, the only sense of self that I had ever known heretofore, but also I was perhaps not my best self at coping with what the changes that life had thrown at me. So that was really an inflection point in my life where things really changed. I was to find the doors of recovery, which certainly helped. And that possibly put me more open, if you will, to whatever, call it what you will, the doors that the universe opened for me, or as Oprah used to say, the pebbles that life was throwing at me to pay attention to. And so it sort of put what could have been a real wall in my career path actually acted as a springboard or an opportunity.
But I bet it didn't feel like that then.
It most certainly did not feel like that then. I was somewhat adrift and very lost, and really in a moment of grace, as I said, not only found the doors of recovery, but was offered a very odd career change that led me into basically executive recruitment, which is a very strange leap from being a producer. I worked in many ad agencies and production companies in the Toronto market. And then I suddenly found myself and I saying yes to this opportunity that I was offered around being a recruiter, and which is such a strange left turn. But I said yes. I can remember hearing myself saying yes to the job and thinking, what? How? I have no idea what I'm doing. And in fact, it was a career change or a left turn, as I like to refer to it in my career, that gave me great satisfaction. And not only that, it led me into volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity, which then in turn led me to a career with Habitat for Humanity, which is more than 21 years ago now.
Wow. Well, so now, as we talk about it in the past tense, it sounds like a tidy little bow, right? Oh, this led me to that, and that led me to that, as if it was all planned and ever so comfortable. But that's just not how change is it? I mean, it sounds like it really toppled your apple cart. And also, from hearing you speak about this in other ways, to be a director or a producer, rather, to be doing that's the kind of juicy stuff you like to talk about with people at cocktail parties, right? You can, what do they say, dine out on those kinds of stories. But explaining what you did as a recruiter, that gets a little dicier to explain, right? And it doesn't sound as sexy, and it doesn't get people going, ooh, ah, in the exact same way, right? I'm wondering how your ego weathered that.
It's a very good question, and you're very right. I mean, when I say I defined myself as a producer, largely what that means is I got a lot of traction from that. It was really good cocktail party conversation.
And since you were drinking then, that also worked compatibly, right?
It was a literal cocktail party, not a figurative cocktail party. That's exactly right. It got a lot of traction. People were like, oh, really? That's really interesting. You produced that commercial, or you worked on that sitcom, or you worked on that feature film. That's really interesting. So yes, it played to what I like to call now my capital E ego. It fed whatever sort of sense of insecurity that I had was bolstered by this job that I had. And so when that all came to a screeching halt, and once I figured that I needed to find any other really path forward, I was really, when I got into the recruitment role, I was a little floundering, but I have to tell you that I was almost immediately surprised that I found what I think is a really elusive quality, which is kind of a work-life balance. I have often said that there is no such thing as work-life balance. At least it has been true in my case. I'm either 100% all in on either or, but never both. But during that period of time, I found this sense of balance. I was new to the doors of sobriety, so it gave me an opportunity to earn a living, to enjoy the job that I did, most surprisingly to me at the time, to find the doors of recovery, to focus on the doors of recovery, and to focus on kind of a mantra that I adapted at that time, or that came to me at that time. And that was sort of taking the next right step. And that mantra has served me well throughout my life, probably, but most significantly from that time to this. I don't know what you know about people who are working their way to the doors of recovery, but we are often people who, we're looking for a sign. And I like to say, we like big signs, like I was looking for a burning bush. And really, when I learned the mantra of taking the next right step, sometimes the next right step is really just getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth and washing the dishes and getting dressed and showing up at a position and giving them a dime for their nickel and doing what's in front of you to do in the best way possible. And I don't know that I consciously thought that at the time, but certainly in reflection, that seems to be what I was doing. And I unequivocally give credit to those that found the doors of, in my case, Alcoholics Anonymous prior to me. So who probably taught me that, they probably said that, and they certainly walked the talk and exemplified that. And I was able to find that lesson, which was an absolute gift.
It's interesting having these conversations, Karen, with what I now call my morning glory people, telling their morning glory stories. I'm interested. So many of them have said something like this about they didn't have some big grand vision. They just took the next step that they could figure out to take. And if it was wrong, they corrected it. And if it was right, they stepped another. And there's something in the wisdom of the as you call them, the doors of recovery, that kind of one day at a time, those axioms that can sound corny on the outside, but that come from a deeply wise place, because I'm finding them so baked in to survivor stories, to thriver stories, to innovator stories.
Yeah.
It just seems like they're common there.
They are. There's something about, recovery is about surrender. And I think, I want to quote somebody from one of the rooms who used to say, "Oh, God save us from an alcoholic with a plan," and by the time you get to the doors of recovery, hopefully you're out of plans. And so all of my grandiose plans were kind of dissolved. And so I was out of options. And so I was teachable, and I think, I used to see, and I think a lot of people, I don't pretend to speak for all addicts. I don't pretend to speak for the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's really important that your listeners understand that this has been my experience. But certainly, what I found was that I just needed to surrender. And when I surrendered and when I basically hit my knees, I became teachable. I was willing to listen to, I didn't have a better idea or a better plan. And that really, it saved that ultimately. It was my experience that saved my life.
Golly, Karen, in all the years that I've been a therapist and working with recovering people, I've never heard somebody explain surrender so concisely as you just did, that I was all out of plans and I had to just let it be. And you're kind of forced into surrender, but there's a moment when you kind of stop scheming, right? And you do what you need to do. In the middle of this also, and I'm not sure what the timeline is, but you also suffered a really, really profound loss. Can you say something about that? Because the road of recovery isn't always just stop drinking, everything gets better from there. Ta-da. Tell me about how loss has featured into your path.
Sure. And it does get better. It does get better. That is absolutely the case. And it also gets different. Is another thing that we say. And so for me, it does get better. I mean, I was at that time period in my life, I went from being an all-consumed producer and, with no kind of balance. And I met the woman who was to become my wife during that period. I met her in recovery, and we were to spend the better part of 15 years together. And we got married throughout that period. Trudy used to say all the time, we've been married, but we're just not churched. And so what happened was it did get better. I loved my job. I came to the doors of Habitat for Humanity, and which became a career, and really filled up my soul. And all of the things that I loved to do about work, I was able to apply a lot of my transferable skills into Habitat for Humanity at and around that time. I met Trudy. We, formed a life together. And so it did get better. There's a lot of really good, better there. And then all of the worst things that you can imagine when you are trying to to stop drinking and drugging is, well, I might be able to stop drinking, but what if something happens? What if I have a loss? What if one of my parents dies? What if someone I love dies? Heck, when you're trying not to stop drinking, you'll even say things like, oh my goodness, but what if somebody gets married and I'll never be able to go to another wedding ceremony? It's just ridiculous, the kinds of the barriers that you put in your way. But anyway, so what was to happen for me after a lot of better is that all of those worst fears happen because sadly, death is part of life. And so what happened was in fairly rapid succession, I lost my mom, and then some years later, and then my wife was diagnosed with cancer, and then my father was diagnosed with cancer, and then my wife died, and 2 weeks later, my father died. And that all happened, as I said, in a relatively short period of time. And even now, that was 5 years ago, more than 5 years ago now. Even now, when I tell you that story, it gives me pause to say that I could still be upright and walking and functioning in the world, because it is a fairly tragic story. And as much as I don't want to downplay it, as much as loss is part of life, it was a devastating, terrible time in my life.
That doesn't sound like just a single loss. That sounds like an avalanche of losses.
Yeah.
And those happen to lots of us sometimes. Sometimes things bunch up. I call it grief traffic. It's like a grief traffic jam where it seems to all be there at one time. So I'm wondering, as in part as a recovering person, but even aside from that, just going through those losses at that time, what did you do to get yourself going each day? What were the resources and inspirations and practices that helped you get through that? And part of that, I'm sure, is your recovery program, but even on just an individual level, what was it for you?
Yeah, first and foremost, it was the fact that I was in recovery, that I was sober. I don't think I could have gone through any of this using any kind of substance. I think so. What I learned through the doors, for me, what happened was what I learned through the doors of recovery just helped me kind of deal with life on life's own terms. And I think certainly the people of the recovery community were fundamental to that. It is always about the people that show up for you in your worst possible moments. And that includes people inside of recovery and people outside of recovery. In my case, I had a community of neighbors, physical neighbors, in a community of Michigan that showed up for me in an absolutely stunning way. I will tell you that when we bought that house, we gave, like many people, we gave zero thought to who our neighbors were, other than whether they kept their lawns tidy and what kind of cars they drove. And I hate that sounds so shallow, but it is actually accurate. And those neighbors that we gave so little thought to became my community, my family by extension. They showed up for me in such a profound, for Trudy when she was sick, and for me after the loss, in such a profound way. It is stunning. I'm going to tell you a story that is so surreal to me that it sounds like something you read on Facebook or social media, and I can't believe that it actually happened to me. But during the time when Trudy was so terribly sick, we had her hospital bed in the living room. And Trudy was, you should know about my late wife, that she was an avid gardener. She adored being in the garden. And the time of year in Michigan was prior to the time when there is any real color in the garden. But the snow had gone away, but nothing was growing. And so I'm sitting in the dim light of an evening, and I see kind of movement behind the curtains in our bay window. And it was one of our particular neighbors, and he was setting up tables. And he put a whole bunch of potted plants and flowers out on the tables at eye level for the bay window, so that Trudy from her hospital bed could get some color. And then, I kid you not, this is the part that gives me chills even now. Every morning, I would open the curtains to find more potted plants and more. There was a University of Michigan flag and a hanging basket and more plants. And it became just a cornucopia of color, all surrounding our bay window. People from the neighborhoods that I know, people that I never met. I have no clue to this day who filled that Trudy's Garden, who contributed to Trudy's Garden, but it was a profound lesson. Certainly, in the moment, I was so fixated on the impact that it had on Trudy and on me. But when I think about that now, I think about the community, the humanity, and the kindness that was demonstrated by those people that literally filled me up and helped me in my darkest moments after all that loss, to understand that that in large part I was part of a community that remains close to me to this day. And also I felt a sense of wanting to wanting to pay that back, not to them specifically, but to continue that tradition.
In general. Well, first of all, I now I have to confess to you and to the world. I'm the weepiest willow in the world. So if I get weepy, that happens. But two things come to mind with that. One is this: there's an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote that I've had in my brain forever, and he wrote, "And in the end, we are all just humans drunk on the idea that love and only love could heal our brokenness." I think about those simple demonstrations of love. Putting picnic tables and eye level flowers, thinking about how it would look from the other side of the bay window, is such an intimate and loving gesture, because it's about empathy, right? It's about stepping into somebody else's socks and looking at the world the way that they're looking at it and trying to make it a little bit better. Mm-hmm. There's something really extraordinarily beautiful about that. And then I'm thinking about how you're talking about neighbors and how important that was to you. And now what you're doing is you're giving people neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. I have admired Habitat for Humanity forever, though I've sent a pittance now and then when I can, but I've never really participated. And I've always thought, gee, what could I do? But I'm thinking about it now and thinking bigger. It's not just about the house. It's about the community of people, too, that come with those new neighbors. I'm wondering if that's been your experience, or am I just making that up?
Oh, no, 100%. Certainly, I credit my mom and dad when I was younger in some kind of, they planted some kind of charitable seed in my soul that I was not aware of until much later in reflection. And it has really come home to roost, if you will, during my work with Habitat for Humanity. It is, let's not kid ourselves. Nonprofit work is hard work, but it is the greatest privilege of my life to make my living by working for Habitat for Humanity. I have had the distinct honor and privilege to serve on the leadership team with President and Mrs. Carter and your annual project.
That's certainly an enviable thing. Many of us watching them think, wow, I hope they're as wonderful in person as I assume them to be.
Absolutely, unequivocally, absolutely, yes. And more so. So,
you made my day, Karen.
Yeah, absolutely. My personal heroes, both of them. And so, through my work with Habitat or my role in Habitat and with President and Mrs. Carter, I have had occasion to see the impact that home has in the families that we serve in more than 70 countries around the world, certainly around the 5 boroughs of New York City, in 1,200 communities around the United States. And I have a sort of litany, if you will, of faces and stories of those families. And these are people who are quite honestly, doing as everything they can do to provide simple, decent, and affordable shelter in sometimes devastating circumstances, and yet the human spirit in them prevails. And so what Habitat really does is we provide a hand up, not a handout. And so I like to think about, in terms of the families we serve, who among us has not, at some point in their life, required or needed or acknowledged a hand up from someone along the way. Certainly me. And so Habitat does that in a way as it relates to shelter. And these families participate in that. They actually pay for their homes, and then the funds that they pay are recycled and create future homes. So it is by definition a cycle. But one of the things that's so amazing about Habitat, over and above the families that live in the homes that we build is really the community of volunteers. As I get older, I am so keenly aware of the number of communities to which I belong and the role in those communities and how that sustains me. And this community of volunteers that I have been privileged to amass over 20 some years with Habitat, they are literally an army of global humanitarians and do-gooders. And I am sustained in my darkest moments by great stories of families getting the keys to their home, and also great stories of tremendous giving that comes from the volunteers who give of themselves to be part of this building process. In the F. Scott Fitzgerald also says, and I may get this wrong, so forgive me.
Paraphrased.
Yeah, he also says that in the dark night of the soul, it's always 3:00 in the morning, which is a quote that alcoholics like a lot, because we are pretty, at least in my case, I was pretty hooked on my despair. But I think about these volunteers and the families that I've been privileged to be involved with, and they turn the light on in that dark night of the soul. That they light up. It lights up in me even now, 20 years later. I am the hair. I often say the hair on the back of my neck stands up when I tell a story about Habitat for Humanity, and that hasn't stopped happening.
I have this image of you as you talk, and I'm thinking, you're having a rough time. You've got some zoning hassle, some funding problems, I don't know if we're going to make it, some legislation from somebody that doesn't know what the impact of all that's going to be and all that. You're wrestling all of those mechanicals to get things done. And I can just almost see you sitting at your desk and closing your eyes and conjuring the image of a family that you've helped and say, okay, whatever the hell, we've got to get through this because we got other people that need this, right?
Yeah, I'm sitting in my office as we do this interview, and of course I don't have to close my eyes because I'm looking across from my desk, and there's a wonderful image of a family that we worked with in 2006 in India, and this woman was all of about, in physical stature, about 5'1", if that. She didn't speak a word of English. And I love this story and the reason that her picture is on the wall here is because here she is, this 5'1" tall woman making, $2 to $4 a day in very poor rural India. And we had just finished a week of building. And I, of course, have my walkie-talkie and my event vest, and I'm walking around and I'm part of the crew, and I'm watching from the outside in as her house is coming and taking shape. And at the end of that week, we do a dedication ceremony, and she was a Hindu, and so her ceremony was very much in keeping with her faith. And everybody was, and then people were adding their own prayers for whatever faith they practiced. And at the end of this prayer, I was standing on the outside, and she came through that crowd like she was parting water. And she walked up to me and she held my face in her hands, and she touched my face and touched her heart. And she had tears pouring down her face, and I had tears pouring down my face, and everybody who witnessed it did. And what that spoke to me in that moment, I can't tell you the number of times that story sustains me, because no words were exchanged. And yet you talk about the language of the heart. This work had a profound effect. And she was just trying to acknowledge that while I wasn't a volunteer who had worked on her home, she clearly knew that I played some role. And I look at her face, and it's her face often that I see when things get tough. And that's not to take away from the New York families. There are a lot of, I am privileged that I have literally hundreds of those stories. And but she is the one that comes to mind.
Well, I think it's because it's beyond words.
Yeah.
It's just that image emblazed in your heart and in your brain and everywhere else that such things are saved. Right now, I don't know about you, but as we record this, it's just a really crazy, nutty time in our country of the United States and in the world, certainly, with saber rattling and craziness and corruption and all kinds of bad things going on, that sometimes just it feels like there's no control. You can't control anything, but somehow finding that one thing you can control, like you can't control the world, but you can get a house for this one Indian woman, right? This is the one thing I can do.
Yeah.
There's got to be something very lovely about finding those
I
things?
am very, very confident that my work at Habitat for Humanity and the countless numbers of families that I have been privileged uh, to work with and to witness, and the volunteers, I am very confident that my work has certainly not only sustained me in today's day and age, it certainly, I think it has contributed measurably to my sobriety and to my sanity.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that we don't have our down days. I woke up this morning and I thought it has been a particularly dark day, and I thought, I'm I'm really looking for planet B. Everybody says there is no planet B, but I'm really starting to think, wow, I'd like to get off this planet. That isn't meant to be, you know, um, anything other than just holy smokes. In every corner there seems to be unrest, and as you said, saber rattling, and the situation around climate change in Australia and everywhere you look. If you're looking, I guess maybe it's what you look for, Betsy. I mean, maybe it's our task to, rather than focus on the things that are so easily presented to us for darkness, it's about looking for the goodness, looking for the bright spots.
And not ignoring the bad, but
Yeah.
well, isn't it kind of, I call it Serenity Prayer 101,
Yeah.
right? I think of that maybe less as a prayer and more as a sorting device. The things I can't control, the things I can. When do I need to buck up and get courageous and do something bigger than I think I can do? And when is the time I need to just let it be, because there's not a damn thing I can do about that, but I can do this other thing.
Yeah, acceptance continues to be a daily struggle. Some days
It's
more
not
so.
my favorite thing either. It's not my favorite
It
thing.
is not my favorite thing either. And it's funny. I had this conversation with a mutual friend of ours not so long ago, and sometimes acceptance to me could sound like resignation, like I'm going to be resigned to the fact that it is what it is. I never say it is what it is unless it's something I don't like. um, and so, but acceptance, truly accepting life on life's terms, which is, again, I am stealing from the Doors of Recovery around that term. I did not invent it, but life on life's own terms is really acceptance. And so at the moment, life on life's terms seem pretty dark in every corner. So I guess back to trying to find our corner of sanity is to find those things for which we are grateful, to find, and they also teach you in recovery that if you are struggling, whether it is with drinking or not, or whether it's with what's going on between your ears, is to help another person. And that is kind of the secret. And that if you get out of yourself and do something for someone else, the big secret that nobody tells us is that it actually makes you feel good. I often call this work small s selfish that I do, that I get to do.
As opposed to big E ego.
As a big E ego, or big S selfish, which is all of the things that our parents told us not to be. Don't be so selfish, right? But I think small s selfish is actually, I do this work because it makes me feel good. It fills me up. And it's not capital S selfish or big E ego driven. It's hopefully takes a lowercase approach.
Many decades ago, a priest friend of mine said to me that when we put 2 pennies in the poor box, which is a very Catholic expression, but when we put 2 pennies in the poor box, one is for the poor and one is for ourselves.
Yeah.
That made me feel, he said, you don't have to feel bad about feeling good about doing good.
That's right.
It's really fine to be that.
It's really fine to get some sense of fulfillment out of doing good in the world. I think, I think we needn't feel a sense of guilt about that, for certain. I think it's actually, it's where I find joy.
Well, Karen, I have one last question for you, and then I could talk to you for 6 or 7 hours, but we don't have that kind of time in this moment. But I do have one last question. I noticed, of course, in the bio that I read of yours, the emphasis on work with the LGBTQ community. Can you say specifically what the specific challenges are for that population in housing?
Sure.
And why there's an emphasis there? Because that's just something that stands out as a little different.
Yeah. Well, we have a saying at Habitat for Humanity, or that I like to parrot quite a lot, and it's, if you've seen one habitat, you've seen one habitat. And so we are most specifically known for home ownership, and so partnering with families to provide some sense of stability in their lives, and to allow them some opportunity to accrue wealth, or break the cycle of poverty through kind of the home and the shelter that they live in. So many are struggling, and they're over the rent burdened, or living in insufficient or inadequate housing, or undersized, or unsafe, or unhealthy. So that is our core focus. But because I kind of subscribe to this theory that to whom much is afforded, and I think I'm stealing from the Bible now, but to whom much is afforded, much is expected. And Habitat for Humanity has afforded a great brand reputation and organizational reputation. And so my work here in New York City is a very complex market. And so we have actually focused, we are working on a project which is very unique in the habitat system, and that is, we are co-developing a project in Manhattan, which will be home to 122 very low-income seniors, and it will be a supportive housing or a rental project, and up to 30% or more of the seniors will be formerly homeless seniors. And there will be an LGBTQ focus to this building. And the reason for that, to get to the answer of your question, is really because for very low income populations, specifically seniors, they're very often forced into untenable situations in their declining years, sometimes back in the closet. So think about it. You finally find some kind of shelter in some kind of rental scenario, and you don't know who lives beside you. You don't know what their viewpoints are. You may often be forced back into a place where you're living next door to, as we used to say in the olden days, an Archie Bunker type who does not accept your lifestyle, and who makes your life more difficult and untenable in any number of ways that we might imagine. And so there is a movement. Habitat is it is unique in our system for us to take a role in this. We have partners in our development that we are doing. There are other organizations that focus on this community, and we saw an opportunity that we could be additive to this. And so this population is vulnerable, certainly because of their declining years, because of their very low income status, and again, because of their lifestyle. We just want to protect that they can age gracefully in a place to call their own, in a safe environment. So we have partners that help us.
Oh, wonderful. So I wasn't aware of that particular tilt on it. I assumed it might be because so many in the LGBTQ community may not have the same family system that other people do, because they might have been abandoned by those family members or whatever. But this is another layer too of social acceptance, and I imagine that's the same thing true for people of color, for other populations that may be deemed undesirable neighbors by your Archie Bunker types.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful thing you're doing.
I'm so often touched by the stories that we hear from this community, and many of them didn't expect to live this long, because of many of them are survivors of the AIDS crisis, and with the and so whenever it's so easy to forget that, and then when you hear it just stops me in my tracks. That of course they didn't expect to live this long. They probably, as you say, they don't have the support of. Not everyone has the support of their families, and it does create some really untenable scenarios for our aging population. So I'm very grateful to be able to have the support of my board and a really strong staff here in New York City that is helping us to be part of this exciting project.
Karen, thank you so much for being with me today. I think we're going to have more conversations, because I think I've got lots more to learn from you. I hope that I get the chance to do that sometime, and hope that I will.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you. I spent some time listening to others of your guests, and I am honored to be among the company of the other Morning Glories. So thank you.
So many gems and extra blooms in my conversation with Karen today. And a theme keeps coming up in a lot of these conversations, and it's always about that kind of taking the next right step. That Karen's not the first person I heard say that. And so many of us wait for that big vision, or as she called it, the burning bush sign that tells us what we're supposed to do. But very often what we need to do is just take the next right step. I rather like that. If you're interested in learning about how to contribute to Habitat for Humanity, just know that Karen has reassured me that there is a place for every kind of person on a build, whether it's somebody who really can wield a hammer and a saw, or whether it's somebody that can just bring the cupcakes and keep the morale up and work in the office and file the receipts. So there's a place for you. You can go to habitat.org to find an organization near you. Thanks so much for listening to the Morning Glory Project today. And I'll look forward to another time when there's another conversation to be had. Until then, go out and bloom.